A while back on the channel, I covered this fan-made source port of Doom on Game Boy Advance. It's arguably a better version of Doom on GBA and allows for a more PC experience on the go. Outside of playing the original 4 experiences on Game Boy Advance, it also opened the door for custom Doom mods to be played on GBA. The process to make these happen isn't easy, so a small community has sprung up around the GBA port dedicated to bringing some of the many WADs released over the years over to the handheld. I wanted to spotlight this initiative and showcase that with dedication and some hard work, the Doom community can bring custom Doom experiences to one of the more underpowered outings. It also gives you a sneak peek at what Doom could have been on Nintendo's handheld console. The versions I'm playing today were made by Bazooka Face over on the GBA temp forum. But yeah, let's dive in and see what GBADoom can do with some of these classic WADs. So the first WAD we're going to jump into here is Scythe, and this is a 32 level Mega WAD made by Eric Alm in April 2003. That was when it was released. Now, the thing is, this is obviously not going to be super intense, initially at least. Scythe is noted for being pretty easygoing in its opening levels, but it gets very aggressive as we kind of move through proceedings. Now the thing here is that I am playing this on my Game Boy Advance player on the GameCube, so this is running on actual hardware. One of the things with this Game Boy Advance port of Doom is that the performance can be a bit inconsistent, and the reason for that is because the frame rate has been left uncapped. So sometimes you'll get a lot of performance, and then sometimes you will not get a lot of performance. I have found when playing through some of these WADs that dropping the difficulty down to the middle difficulty, or even down to I'm Too Young to Die, really does add a lot of frames into the proceedings. But the simple fact that you can play a version of Scythe on the go, and you know, it's playable. It's definitely very playable. Now, obviously, you probably have noticed there is no music. Now, one of the issues when converting these over, from what I've been able to see, is that sometimes some things don't make the conversion very well. So custom music seems to kind of be a problem unless it's intentionally patched in. But also on top of that, sometimes the skyboxes don't work. But to be honest, if you're playing this on the go, the fact that you get to play this on the go on Game Boy Advance would have been enough. But it's nice to see this existing here, just because it's a nice little proof of concept. And as you can see, this is not like the Doom 2 version on Game Boy Advance that you can buy at retail. There is actual lighting implementation in this version, so this is warts and all the same as the PC experience, just a little bit sort of choppier at points, but it's definitely very playable. I've wanted to make this video for a long time because I think it's very important to sort of showcase the other aspects of what the Doom community can achieve, because sure, porting Doom to devices big and small is impressive, but sometimes just seeing sort of these iconic level sets being played where they shouldn't really be allowed, it's just so exciting to me. And seeing this running on Game Boy Advance hardware, it really is very impressive. Now, from all my research around this topic, and I have done a bit of research to sort of be able to tell you about it, unfortunately it seems that anything that kind of needs dehacked tools or assistance cannot be run in this way, and it can't be compiled to run on the Game Boy Advance, at least not with the sort of version that we're using here. And from what I've also been able to tell, WADs that have a lot of geometry, so a lot of complex geometry, are also pretty much a no-go, because there's only so much wiggle room in terms of performance that you can actually get out of these WADs. Now, the other thing to note as well is I would love to play through and see what the final few levels of Scythe actually run like, because I guarantee that the levels that turn into slaughter maps at the end of this will not run anywhere near as well as they do here. And you can already see, heading outside here, because there's a lot of enemies, there's a lot of geometry, the performance takes a little bit to sort of fix itself. And obviously when we sort of turn around here, it goes a bit, well, you can see. Obviously this is a fan-made creation, so obviously, you know, it's not been tweaked, it's not been tidied up in a way that, you know, a retail release you would probably expect. But hey, just getting this to run at all is pretty great. The next WAD I want to show off here is from 1995. This is Memento Mori, a 32 level WAD designed by the Innocent crew, and to be honest, this runs a lot better than Scythe does. And like I said, I think one of the things that you have to kind of take into consideration is complex geometry plus a load of enemies leads to some impressive slowdown. And I feel more confident saying you could probably play through most of Memento Mori on the Game Boy Advance, in probably all of it in fact, and you would probably not run into the kind of issues you were running into in Scythe. Because a lot of the levels from 1995 are simpler, and that doesn't mean they're worse, it just means that, you know, there's not as much going on for the Game Boy Advance to deal with. But yeah, this is running very, very impressively. In terms of controls, I mean, it's about as good as you can expect from a console with 2 face buttons and a D-pad and 2 shoulder buttons. At the end of the day, you know, the D-pad controls, they do take a bit of getting used to, so if you do find yourself experimenting with this, there is a bit of a learning curve if you've never really sat down to play any of the Game Boy versions of Doom in the past. But even here, I feel like performance is still pretty good. You can obviously tell that, you know, there's a lot going on outside because the performance has taken a bit of a knock, but as we head outside here, it really isn't that bad. I won't even lie to you, like, considering like how bad Game Boy Advance Doom 2 can get at points, this really isn't, you know, anything that, if you've ever played those versions of Doom, you haven't already experienced. There is one level later on in Memento Mori. If I was given the chance, I would probably jump to that and have a look. It's a big, wide, open level with a giant canal sort of in the center of it. I'd love to see that level because I'd be curious to see how that would handle under this. But as I mentioned, Memento Mori has a lot of custom music, and unfortunately, none of that actually makes it over, at least not in the version that was made here. And that's fine. Honestly, like I said, unfortunately, there are certain drawbacks that have to be made, including if you look at the skybox on the outside there. It makes use of the default Doom 2 skybox, which, again, for me, that's an acceptable compromise, because how many WADs have you played over the years on PC that use that exact same skybox? It just kind of fits in thematically. But as you can see from this, custom textures do make the jump if they are sort of recompiled in the correct way, I assume. And that's me trying to talk like I understand how you would even make all this happen, because to me this is all just so impressive, because the Game Boy Advance is not designed for 3D games, but here we are playing Doom, which, while technically not a 3D game, is as intense as an early 3D game, so it's basically the same thing to the console. It's just so cool to me, and I know it wouldn't have happened, but if in the day they'd released like compilations with WADs on them, I would have been all over that for Game Boy Advance. If you've not played this version of GBADoom, I recommend giving it a try. It's definitely a step up over the base GBADoom ports in my opinion, just because I feel that Doom 1 is a very compromised version of Doom 1 in my opinion on Game Boy Advance, and there's a lot of discussion and talk about like the issues around the development of that one and kind of how things sort of panned out. So with Doom 2 on the other hand, Doom 2, it feels like Doom at points, but then there are times where like the game behaves in a very, very odd way. You can see there's a lot of space around this bridge, and there was a bunch of enemies, and things went fine. Obviously, you know, you're not going to be hitting 60 frames a second here. This is not your modern Doom port, but again, as someone who grew up playing Memento Mori and playing this to death, and Memento Mori 2 to death, it's just crazy to me that there's even a way that you can put this onto a real Game Boy cartridge and play this on the go. It's just absolutely crazy to me, absolutely fabulous. The Doom community does some absolutely amazing stuff. Speaking of Memento Mori 2, here it is running on Game Boy Advance. Now, it's important to note here that the custom HUD has not made its way over, although the sort of font light up effect that they use in this WAD has made its way over, so some of the numbers do look a bit blown out at the bottom. But again, this is Memento Mori 2 on the go. Now, this was released in 1996. It's a sequel to Memento Mori. It goes a lot harder on the custom textures and its own theming. Once again, the custom music didn't make the jump as well, so this is very much a kind of mostly Memento Mori 2 experience. It's got the levels, it's got the textures, and it's got the enemy placements, but it's not got the HUD and it's not got the custom music. But again, the performance here is pretty sound, and unlike with Memento Mori 1, I can't actually think on the top of my head if there'd be any levels that would truly challenge GBADoom. Maybe I'll do a playthrough of these at some point on the channel, because I can't imagine too many people have played through these all the way through to the end, and it'd be pretty fun to kind of re-experience these through the channel with all of you. I will jump to the second level here, just so you can kind of get a flavour for what this WAD actually looks like playing on Game Boy Advance. But once again, some of these rooms are quite large and some of them are a bit complex, and they are running pretty fine. So again, if you play this on the lower difficulties, if you do decide to give this a try, I think you'll have a better time than playing on Ultra Violence. If you play on Ultra Violence, I found that the performance lost about 4 or 5 frames, and when you're dealing with a game that's running around 20 frames a second, that can be the difference between being very playable and being barely playable. So this is Doom Zero. Now, what's really interesting about this getting a small port over to the Game Boy Advance in this way is that it does actually make use of de-hacked objects and monsters. So I'm actually kind of interested to know how they did this. When I was looking through the WAD list that they produced for this, I was able to see that there's actually a non-fixed version of this, which tells me that potentially they may have gone in and changed some small things about this one to get it to work in this. Now, I would probably imagine that they may have taken out some of the custom monsters that you see later in Doom Zero, potentially also maybe sort of bringing some of the levels more in line with traditional Doom. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be any kind of expert on this, how this even came to be. So all I can really say is that people much cleverer than me, people much more technically finesse than me, were able to get this running on Game Boy Advance, and you can see that here. Now, here's the thing. Would you want to play this on Game Boy Advance? I mean, how many people do you think have actually gone through and played this on Game Boy Advance? I mean, that's a pretty impressive thing to boast about, I'd say. I might be tempted to give this one a playthrough as well, because performance here is very, very solid. Like, even though there's a lot of enemies, a point. But yeah, I mean, if you've played this on the PC, then this is that same experience. And one of the things about Doom Zero that I really, really like is that each of the levels kind of has a sort of choose your own adventure style thing going on. So you can still pick the 3 keys here between them, and you can choose which key you want to pick up, and that affects your experience of the rest of the level. Now, I know that some of you are probably going to ask me here, how many of these are there in existence? And the answer is, I can't give you an answer to that. From the sources that I've been looking at, there are at least maybe about 24 WADs that have been put together that are fully complete. There's even more that are semi-complete or not fully complete, and there's things missing. So if you kind of go hunting for these, you'll probably find a whole bunch of different experiences, and that's really, really cool. Now, as for how many of these are actually out in the wild, I know that the person that made these ones in particular, they did about 24 of them, and that was over the space of several years. So the answer is, I don't know how many of these WADs are actually out there. From my count, probably about 24. Some of those have been fully completed, some of them have not been fully completed. It really just kind of depends on pot luck, and unfortunately, you know, not every WAD has been brought over in this way. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I'd love to see this WAD here in this way, unfortunately, unless you know the technicalities of how to do this yourself, it's very difficult to get this to actually happen on a case-by-case basis. But at the same time, you know, with stuff like this, I always feel that we should just be grateful that it even exists in the first place. And stuff like this, for example, it doesn't really need to be overly complicated. Don't get me wrong, I would love to see something like Nuts running on Game Boy Advance just for the sheer novelty of it, but at the same time I accept that it's not always feasible to make that kind of thing happen. But again, just exploring around the opening part of this level, you can see that the performance is pretty great. I mean, well, it's as good as you're going to get on a Game Boy Advance, and these areas are not simple. These are not like super square rectangle rooms. There are actually different depths. There's lots of enemies. So this is very, very interesting and very, very fun to play through. The final mod that I'm going to showcase on Game Boy Advance here is the way that it did it. And for me, like I said, seeing these running on Game Boy Advance is just enough for novelty for me to want to come and talk about this. I'm not showcasing these in this way to sort of make people go, oh, well, you know, I've already seen these WADs 100,000 times. You know, and that's true. If you play these on PC, you've probably played through these so many times and you've experienced them, but playing them on Game Boy Advance, it just hits a bit different. It feels like you're not supposed to be able to do this. It feels like this shouldn't be allowed, and here it is. It's a WAD that many people have played, running on hardware that it wasn't intended for, and like you can see, it's doing a pretty admirable job of it. Again, it can't be understated that Doom on Game Boy Advance, even the retail versions, do not perform brilliantly across the board. Doom 1 is better for more consistent performance, but even it struggles with lots of enemies on screen, lots of spaces. So the fact that this is reaching that sort of level, and it's usually with bigger levels, more enemies, a lot more complexity, it's just really, really cool to me. And that's the kind of thing that I really enjoy about the Doom community. The fact that the Doom community will make this kind of thing happen, and it doesn't really get much publicity. So for me, it's like, I wanted to show this off because to me, this is such a cool little niche within the Doom community that is already full of little niches. But I think that's going to be it for this video. Now, if people want to see me do full playthroughs of these and sort of absolutely stress test them to the max, I'm more than happy to do that. Like I said, I've got all these WADs now and I'm able to play through them if I really want to on real hardware. And that's something an experience that I would be more than happy to share with you if people feel that that's something that, you know, they'd want to see. I can definitely do these as videos. I can do them as streams so people can watch them after the streams are done. This is a topic of Doom that I really want to cover a lot more on the channel. The Game Boy Advance definitely has a really cool development scene around it, and people have really worked hard to bring these to the Doom community, and I feel that showing them off and bringing attention to them is the best way that I can sort of pay that back to those people. So let me know in the comments, which WAD would you love to see done in this style? Would you play this? And do you want to see more of videos of this on the channel? Maybe even full playthroughs? Let me know. Thank you very much for watching.